Greetings and bienvenue, Midnight Crew. Thank you for returning to this broadcast. And welcome to new viewers joining us for the first time. If you like a video, then feel free to subscribe.
You might find the format of this story a bit odd. You will understand why it's written this way towards the end. Multiple narrators will be used to help make sense of everything.
OK/X/ I have a story to tell. This happened to me a few years back when I was still working as a reporter. I have it all written already because I wanted it to be written down. The following story is based on a real event, or at least an event that was related as real to me. About 4 years ago, I was covering a story and staying at a hotel in a small town about 70 miles west of Chicago, Illinois. I checked in late and got to talking to the night auditor, a man I'll just call Sid. Sid related to me a terrifying tale that seemed so freakish that I swore it had to be made up, even telling Sid so at the time. He just shook his head and said, "Look it up." That night and over the following weeks, I forgot about Sid's tale until one afternoon I received a plain brown envelope with no return address bearing a Chicago postmark. Inside was a single VHS cassette. It was labeled with a date from about 10 years ago and the words, "Night Audit Surveillance." I watched the video. It showed a mostly boring night shift at the hotel, but around that boredom it provided a glimpse into a nightmare. After I watched the video, I returned to the small town hotel to seek Sid out. I had to ask him some questions. I had to find out more. When I arrived at the hotel and asked for Sid, no one there knew him. The manager nervously told me that no one named Sid had worked in the place for at least 10 years. So unable to locate Sid, I present his tale, cobbled together from the surveillance video and from what he told me occurred. I've taken some liberty with the dialogue and thought processes of the people involved. I've also changed names and locations. I've done some of my own research about the hotel, which I've included here to give the reader a bit of historic background. But I assure you, what you are about to read is near verbatim what was related to me. The night auditor, Sid, came in from the early September rain as the front desk phone rang. Taking off his jacket, he picked up the receiver, noting on the phone's display the room the call came from. 206. One of the suites. "Front desk," he said and waited for a reply. No reply came. Front desk. Still no reply. He hung up. As he hung up the phone, the front desk clerk from the second shift came out of the break room hallway. "Did the phone ring?" "Yeah, no worries, I got it. It was 206, but there wasn't anyone there. I'll head up in a minute to see what they needed." The other clerk, Tria, just looked at him. "What?" Sid said. "There's no one in 206, she said. Sid laughed quietly. "Huh? There's no one in 206. Must be a phone malfunction. This old place wouldn't surprise me one bit." Sid finished counting in his cash drawer as he spoke. "I've been getting phantom calls from the suites all week. I'll check the phone box upstairs when I make my rounds." "Okay, sweetie," Tria said. "We good?" She motioned at the cash drawer. "Yep, all here. Feel free to clock out whenever." Tria disappeared into the hallway. A moment later, she came back out with her coat on. "Still raining out there?" "Cats and dogs, Tria, my darling. Cats and dogs." She laughed and headed through the double-glass doors and out into the rainy night. The hotel, a sturdy 4-story brick building, stood on the last block of the downtown historic district. Though it wasn't included as part of the historic district because of its history of extensive interior alterations. Still, the brick exterior, with its hint of Art Deco, remained largely unchanged since its completion in 1933. Before the hotel was built, a Victorian mansion stood on the lot. The Gothic Revival building bore a striking resemblance to the nightmare fuel-haunted houses that have become a Hollywood trope. Its wrought iron spires reached from its turrets into the sky, mirroring the wrought iron fence that surrounded the property. The mansion was constructed around the turn of the 20th century by a rich local merchant who became the area's first representative to Congress. He'd lived out his life after Congress at the corner of Palmetto and Carolina Streets as the small city grew around him. Eventually, once the congressman and his wife passed, their daughter Anna moved into the impressive house. Years passed and Anna remained in the house alone. She was rarely seen about town, perhaps occasionally as she did some shopping at one of the many locally owned stores that began to spring up in the prosperous downtown shopping district. By the early 1930s, property taxes and the Depression became more than the meager government pension allowed her to afford. She let it be known, through her lawyer and friend at Albertson, that the property at the corner of Palmetto and Carolina Streets was for sale. Sid settled in for another long night at the hotel by himself. He didn't mind the night audit. Most of the time he just browsed the internet all night long. The meaningless tasks he needed to complete became background noise and took almost no thought at all. Laundry, rounds, audit, set up breakfast. Every day he did them at the same time, in the same order, and counted the hours until he could walk home. Sid was in the middle of folding a huge comforter while doing his best Huey Lewis impression, along to the song pumping out of the lobby ceiling speakers when the phone rang again. Startled, Sid looked up, set the comforter on the antique lobby couch, and walked around behind the front desk to answer the phone. Room 206, again. Sid let the phone ring 3 times before he picked it up. "Front desk," he said into the receiver. There was no reply, just dead air. "Front desk, this is Sid, can I help you?" He knew there couldn't be anyone on the line. Still no reply. But this time the dead air turned to static. Sid listened to the static for a moment. He thought he could hear someone trying to speak through it. He listened more carefully, drowning out the Huey Lewis and the low hum of the front desk computer. The static on the line continued, but he knew he could hear someone. It sounded like they were saying his name. "Sid? Sid? Sid?" Over and over. Someone was repeating his name through the fog of the static. He could hear it clearly now. "Sid? Sid? Sid?" Chills ran down his back and through his arms. Sid slammed the receiver down. He breathed heavily and beads of sweat rolled down his forehead. "What the?" he said quietly and trailed off. "Tria," he thought aloud. He went to the front desk computer and pulled up the guest register. He scrolled down to room 206. "Vacant," it said in all capital letters. He looked up from the computer and a loud bang came from somewhere around the corner, in the back of the lobby near the bathrooms. He stepped out from behind the desk. "Hello?" he yelled into the lobby. There were only a handful of rooms occupied tonight, but someone could have come down the grand staircase without him knowing. The staircase and the bathrooms were both out of sight from the front desk. "Hello?" he yelled again. "Is someone there?" The only answer was a loud scraping sound, as if someone was drawing their nails across the oak paneling that covered the lobby walls. Sid stepped back, still staring in the sound's direction. As he did, the phone rang again. Its shrill tone scared him, and he visibly jumped at the sound. Sid looked over at the phone and then back toward the lobby. Again, the phone rang. He backed toward it, still watching the lobby. By the time he'd slowly backed himself behind the desk and toward the phone, it had rang 5 times. It rang a 6th time, and he picked it up mid-ring. "A front desk?" he stammered. Just silence. "Hello?" He wiped his forehead. Silence. The call was disconnected. Sid set the receiver down slowly, still watching the lobby.
Despite the mansion's once coveted status, hard economic times made it a tough sell. Anna was forced to negotiate with property owners who intended to demolish the mansion, something she would never abide. But she had few real options. Finally, an out-of-state developer came to Anna with a proposal. This man, this developer, was of apparently mysterious origin, as no one quite remembered his name. Legal documents pertaining to the property all appeared to have been altered to omit the man's name. Searches of local news stories showed mention of the property, Anna, and its sale, but not one mentioned the name of the man who purchased it. The news stories all referred to him as an out-of-state developer. What is known are the details of the deal that put the hotel on the lot. The mansion would be demolished and a horseshoe-shaped 4-story hotel would be constructed on the lot. The deal had one odd stipulation. The corner turret that housed Anna's bedroom would remain standing on the property, connected to the hotel at the center of the horseshoe. Anna would be allowed to stay in her home and live out her life there as the hotel went up around her. When construction was completed, just as the deal stipulated, her bedroom turret remained standing and connected to the hotel. As bizarre and seemingly obscure as the details of this deal might ostensibly be, the local people were well aware of the strange deal that brought the hotel to town. The local librarian and resident historian excitedly related the story of the strange deal. Like many small towns in the Midwest, this one is steeped in history and little else, and as in other similar places, that history is a source of local pride. The hotel was built from 1928 to 1933, and it opened to great fanfare. The whole town came out to celebrate at a grand opening ball, welcome respite from the everyday realities that the Great Depression had brought to this small place. Anna even attended. It was said she was one of the best-dressed women at that ball, catching every man's eye in the room as she left her private suite and descended the grand staircase into the festivities.
Sid set the phone down. He was genuinely scared now. He stared around the corner toward the rest of the unseen lobby, and then he heard the scraping sound again. Like nails across the wood, closer this time, perhaps right around the corner. He brought a hand to his face to wipe away the sweat. "Hello? Who's there?" He called into the empty lobby. The voice that replied was inhuman. "Sid," it said, drawing out the vowel sound, grinding it against his ears. "Holy shh." He trailed off. Panicking, he turned around and grabbed the heavy-duty mag light they kept behind the front desk. "Who the fuck's there?" he yelled. Sid then heard the sound of the keys on the lobby's antique organ being depressed, each eerie note drawn out for maximum effect. Now Sid could hear shuffling feet, dragging across the wool carpet. He could hear the raspy breath of whoever or whatever was coming toward him. Suddenly, Sid sprang from his stupor and ran out from behind the front desk, maglite in hand at the ready. "Who's there?" he screamed as he rounded the corner into the rest of the lobby. He stopped in his tracks. There was no one there. Nothing. He walked further. The table and chairs for guests in the back lobby were all in place. The door to the employees-only area is securely locked. He checked both bathrooms. They too were empty. Entirely weirded out but feeling slightly more relaxed, Sid returned to the front desk and settled in behind the warm glow of the computer monitor, where he continued to peruse the day's news. As he clicked on a story about the antics of several local politicians, the front desk phone rang again.
After the hotel opened, it virtually disappeared from the local consciousness, at least if the lack of mentions in the local press is to be believed. Poring over microfilm of the local newspaper revealed only 2 mentions of the hotel between 1933 and 1983. One was a one-off story about a major real estate convention that was set to convene at the hotel in the summer of 1956. The other mention in the press was so odd, so strange, that it's presented here so that readers may interpret it for themselves. December 17, 1962. The New Wells Hotel is once again at the center of strange mysteries. Well known in the local lore oft related on these pages, residents have the rumor mill churning again when it comes to the hotel. A recent guest related to a police officer here in town that the hotel was a strange place to sleep. When the officer inquired further, the guest shared a story over coffee at Al's on Main Street. The officer told this reporter that the guest showed him a small photograph contained in a silver locket. The photo was old, perhaps dating to the very beginning of photography, the officer said. The strange thing is that the photo was of the guest, whom the police officer stated could have been no more than 40 years old. The guest related that he had found the locket outside of his hotel room door that very morning when he woke to retrieve the newspaper. When he opened it, he found the picture of himself, a picture that the guest told the police officer was never taken of him. Neither the officer nor this reporter knows what to make of the story, but locals know that they should just chalk it up to the oddities surrounding the beloved hotel. Interestingly, the tales that were so oft related on the pages of the local newspaper were nowhere to be found. However, numerous editions of that newspaper were missing from the local library's archives. The paper long ago ceased publication, and thus the physical property is no longer searchable for these missing editions. It seems likely that their pages contain some of this well-known local lore. What remained in the archives at the local library were two other stories relating to the hotel. Those stories, both published on the same day, concerned the 50th anniversary of the hotel's opening and the odd events surrounding the celebratory gala held that night in 1983.
Sid stared at the phone from his perch behind the computer monitor. It kept ringing. He stood up and glanced at the phone's display. Room 206. Again. He started to sweat again and unconsciously brought his hand to his brow to wipe it away. Sid kept staring at the phone, trying to decide whether or not to answer it. He reached down to pick up the receiver and it stopped ringing. At the same time, footsteps began coming down the grand staircase. Heavy stomping footsteps, each one slowly descending toward the lobby and toward Sid. He grabbed the flashlight again and came out from behind the desk. Sid stopped briefly to collect himself, raised the flashlight to the ready, and rounded the corner into the back lobby where he could face the grand staircase head-on. He turned and looked up toward the staircase. A tall hooded figure stood at the top of the stairs looking downward into the lobby. Its face was obscured by the low light and the hood over its head. The setback of the stairs meant that Sid could see the figure, but it couldn't see him. He backed up toward the front lobby and the solace of the exit onto the street. He glanced back at the doors as he stepped back. When he turned around, the figure was gone. He walked forward, all the way to the base of the stairs. There was no one there. He was alone in the lobby. Sid walked back toward the front desk, spinning around once just to make sure there was no one on the stairs. There wasn't. He returned to his front desk post perplexed and dreadfully behind on the night's work. Sid set himself to completing the audit. He pulled the various reports from the computer system and the credit card machines, allowing them to print while he pondered the evening's events. He reached down into the cabinet where the hotel kept their petty cash box, something he did every night. He placed the box on the counter and opened it, prepared to count the cash and ensure that nothing was missing from the previous day. When he opened the box, he was surprised to find a small silver locket attached to a tarnished chain. It was a photo locket, not unlike one might see in an antique shop. He opened the tarnished locket to find a very old photograph, perhaps dating to the very beginning of photography. Stoically looking back at Sid from the locket was a photo of himself. The photo was of Sid at his current age, but he was dressed in Victorian attire, sporting large mutton chops and a ghastly scar across his face. "What the hell?" he said, and dropped the locket. It landed with a thud in the petty cash box, which promptly snapped shut, narrowly missing his fingers.
The next mention of the hotel in the local paper's archives came at the end of the summer of its 50th anniversary celebration on September 6, 1983. That edition of the paper featured two stories about the hotel. The celebration, covered in one story, was somewhat overshadowed by a gruesome discovery in Anna's private suite several hours before the hotel ball began. The discovery was covered in the paper's other story about the hotel that day. According to the account in the local press, a bellhop was making rounds at about 3:30 in the afternoon, the day of the ball, when he passed by Anna's suite and noticed that the door leading in was slightly ajar. He knocked at the door and announced his presence. When no one answered, the bellhop continued on into Anna's suite. The room spanned 2 floors, even while Anna lived there, and the bellhop noticed nothing unusual on the first floor, which was essentially set up as Anna's living room or study. He called her name several times and, receiving no answer, continued up the stairs to Anna's bedroom. He didn't go very far before he saw her feet dangling above the staircase. He immediately returned to the hotel manager and reported what he'd found. The manager called the police, who promptly arrived. Anna hung herself sometime during the night before she was found. The coroner put her time of death around midnight the previous evening, but no one really knew for sure, again, according to the story. Anna's body was removed from the hotel, and the management announced that they intended to go on with the night's planned celebration, despite the noticeable absence of the hotel's most well-known guest. The newspaper's second story focused mostly on the events of the hotel's anniversary celebration, and it noted at its outset that news of Anna's unseemly demise spread rapidly amongst the crowd. The story went on to describe the dancing, drinking, and carousing that went on at the party, It also included a descriptive account of what was most certainly a delicious food spread. It's the story's last 3 paragraphs that were most chilling, though. Those paragraphs follow as they were printed in the newspaper, though the names have been changed. Curiously, several guests at the celebration reported finding some odd trinkets around the hotel. A total of 5 people reported that they found old silver lockets lying around the hotel. "I found this old photo locket in the bathroom," said hotel guest Gene Kershaw of New Wells. "It's weird, the old photo inside looks a lot like me." The other 4 people to find lockets were Thomas Seabank, New Wells, Regina Sutherland, Oregon, Tina Ratcliffe Smith, Chicago, and Anderson Feldsmeyer, also of Chicago. Hotel staff declined to comment on the lockets. While the similarity to other reported incidents, including those related by Sid, is striking, the information uncovered later was even more unsettling. Since the story about the 50th anniversary gala included the names of the people who had found lockets, it was natural to dig into those people. A Google search on the first name in the story, Gene Kershaw of New Wells, caused several news stories to jump right to the top of the search results. "New Wells man brutally murdered," read one headline. "Body found in New Wells Hotel," read another. "Mr. Kershaw was found, sans head, in the boiler room of the New Wells Hotel." A search on Thomas Seabank revealed that he met his demise in a single-vehicle car accident on a state highway west of New Wells. Regina Sutherland of Oregon, Illinois, was found dead, hanging in an abandoned barn in another state. Miss Ratcliffe Smith went missing a year after the hotel gala and was never found. Anderson Feldsmeyer was killed in the background of a news report on live television by an unknown assailant. Follow-up stories about all of the deaths showed inconclusive investigations, where explanations were absent or perpetrators had never been caught.
The next 2 hours of Sid's shift were largely uneventful. He tended to the night audit and folded what was left of the hotel's laundry for the housekeeping staff in the morning. The phone did ring once, and Sid nearly lost himself in panic when it did. He walked over to it and picked it up. It was just one of the early rising guests on the first floor, room 104. He needed an extra towel. Relieved, Sid delivered the towel to his room and returned to the front desk without incident. As the hour ticked past 3 a.m., Sid began to think about preparing the hotel's meager continental breakfast. To do so, he had to go into the attached restaurant's kitchen.
Much of the hotel's first floor is occupied by its large lobby. The entire lobby is clad in oak paneling, creating a beautiful rendition of an early English countryside cottage. Even the wool carpet was imported from England when the hotel's bleak 1920s interior was renovated for its 50th anniversary. What isn't occupied by the lobby on the first floor is occupied by the hotel's cavernous attached restaurant. The restaurant claimed a large ballroom, a smaller meeting room, a full bar, a large dining room, and an up-to-date kitchen. Both the kitchen and the restaurant can be entered directly from the hotel lobby without ever setting foot outside. Even in full daylight, the huge restaurant and its accompanying ballroom can induce flights of fancy in the most skeptical people. At 3 o'clock in the morning, it can be absolutely terrifying.
Sid's breakfast setup usually took about 30 minutes and began around 3:30 a.m. He prepared coffee in the kitchen, and while it brewed, he set up the fruits, cereal, and juices. Sid returned to retrieve the large pots of coffee, one regular, one decaf, and set those out. A recent addition to the hotel's breakfast fare, fat-flecked sausage gravy with biscuits, microwaved while he put the finishing touches on the morning spread. He was always done before 4 a.m., so even the earliest risers had an opportunity to grab a bite to eat before starting their day. That morning was no different. At 3:25 a.m., Sid reached into a drawer behind the front desk and grabbed the keys to the restaurant. Sometimes he'd enter the kitchen through the employees-only door that also led to the hotel's laundry room. Other mornings he'd just enter through the restaurant. That morning he entered through the restaurant. Sid walked through the darkened dining room and hit the bar lights on his way by, so that he'd be able to see when he returned. He went through the swinging doors and into the kitchen, pulled the overhead chain inside the door, and began the process of brewing the coffee. As he dumped the decaf grounds into the filter, he heard a loud bang from the basement. The basement stairs were just off the front of the kitchen, in part of the building that was once part of Anna's original house. Then he heard a glass break. "What the hell?" he said to himself as he grabbed a flashlight from the stainless steel table nearby. Sid walked over to the stairs and shined the light down. Nothing seemed amiss, so he descended the stairs. At the bottom of the stairs, he reached up and pulled the chain on the first light he came to. The dank, unfinished basement was used mostly for storage. He looked around and saw a broken martini glass on the floor. Then he heard another loud bang. It came from further in the basement, down a narrow, low-ceilinged hallway which led to the old boiler room. The old boiler room wasn't used for anything in the hotel. No one ever went down there, except the occasional staff member to smoke pot. Sid had counted himself among those who had journeyed into what was known among the employees as the basement's most terrifying area. The boiler room was empty except for the large, inoperable cast iron boiler and a few old chairs. Sid knew there couldn't be anyone back there, but he knew that his job required him to look into it. If a pipe burst and began flooding the basement, he needed to know about it. So he held up the flashlight and began walking down the unfinished hallway toward the boiler room. He stopped halfway and looked back. The light at the front of the basement had gone out behind him. He swore he left on. He turned back toward the boiler room and was about to step forward when he heard the bang again, this time louder and closer. It was followed by an audible creak, not unlike a door slowly opening. "Sid," a quiet voice whispered, barely audible. He stopped and shined the flashlight into the boiler room about 10 feet ahead. It illuminated only a small area. Something moved across the beam of light, quickly, almost imperceptible. But he saw it. Someone was in there.
During the last research trip to the town, while sitting at a local diner enjoying a cup of coffee, a woman approached and said she saw me doing research in the library. She worked in the hotel at the time Sid's body was found, came in to relieve him the night he disappeared, in fact, and she related a few more details that didn't appear in the news stories about the incident. She said that after the housekeeper had detected the smell, the police were called. A police detective led several other officers down into the basement to retrieve the body and secure any possible crime scene for evidence. They returned quickly, almost climbing over each other to get to the top of the basement stairs. Two of them vomited into the kitchen garbage can. They found Sid's body without its head. One of the officers muttered something about a blood eagle and then started violently throwing up. She asked him about it later, and he would only tell her two things: that the tableau was one of the most gruesome things he'd ever seen, and that the entire boiler room was covered in a black, viscous substance of unknown origin. She mentioned one other thing that she thought was odd about the day Sid's body was discovered. When she came in that morning to find Sid gone, she counted in her drawer and changed shifts as usual. After she called the manager to let her know the situation, she reached into the cabinet to count up the petty cash box. When she opened it, she found a tarnished silver locket suspended from a tarnished silver chain. She opened the locket and found a very old photograph, possibly dating to the very beginning of photography. The weird thing, she said, was that the picture looked exactly like she did, except the woman in the picture was wearing old-timey clothes, as she called them. After the last trip to New Wells and the chat with the woman who had worked with Sid, I left the town and never looked back. I didn't think much about it, convincing myself that what I'd uncovered wasn't actually how things had played out in this small-town hotel. The more time that passed, the less I thought about it and the further away it all seemed. I really hadn't thought about it at all in years. Until September 6, 2013, the hotel's 80th anniversary. I was poking around online and somehow ended up on a story from the suburbs about a woman who was found decapitated outside of New Wells. They included the victim's picture with the story. Smiling back at me from that picture, during what were certainly happier times, was the woman I'd spoken to in the diner that day so many years ago.
OP here. The reason I wrote this down, the reason I shared it tonight, is that I just wanted this story out there. Because it's my story too, and I wanted to leave that behind. The other day, cleaning my apartment, tossing out some old newspapers, still like to read it. September 6th edition on top of the pile. Pick them up. A tarnished silver locket drops from the pile onto the floor. Pick up the locket. Open it. Inside is a picture of me, Except it's not me. It's very old. Perhaps dating to the very beginning of photography. It looks like me, except I have this scar all the way across my face.
Predictable ending. The way it was written confused the shit out of me. First Sid, then previous owner. It's like it was written to be a movie. 7 out of 10 for confusing me.
I hope that you enjoyed tonight's broadcast. If you enjoyed tonight's story, then please subscribe to the channel, as more Greentext will appear daily. A new broadcast will appear when the clock strikes midnight Central Time.